Rolling.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm calling this the prequel to season 2 of Pot Amongst Men.
Yes.
How's that work?
I like that.
Cool. I'm Jason. We're missing a person. We have Brandon here, and we have Ken. Ken, welcome.
Thank you.
To Pot Amongst Men.
Good to be here.
So we're just going to kind of bullshit for as
Yeah.
long as we want.
Yeah.
And we'll throw it together, and it'll be cool.
I have some questions. So I'll ask some questions, and if it gets too technical, then Jason, you can talk to
Okay.
Ken about
Yeah,
it.
go for it.
So I've known Ken for probably 20 years now.
Yeah.
And Ken's been doing music probably since the day I met him. So can you tell us the evolution of music and your thought process? Your bands back then to your bands now, older Ken, wiser Ken. What kind of direction?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was like a lot of you guys, I was, this is my sort of full-time thing in the 90s, the dream of the 90s. So this is, pre social media and pre all that crap. We were still in analog days. And so we were getting into a van and doing the whole DIY, drive around the country, tour, a grunge era kind of.
And this was
experience.
in California?
Yeah, I was in a band in San Francisco, and I was there throughout the 90s, had a couple different bands of varying degrees of success, and, did a couple cross-country tours, and so, we would go into recording studios that were like the very earliest days of Pro Tools.
Oh, yeah.
Back in like 97, 98.
I remember those times, yeah.
But there was this whole... and in those days, digital was so like sketchy. It was, the convenience of it was awesome, but the sound wasn't up to snuff yet. And so we had a lot of people that were analog or die people. And
That was right around the time of Jagged Little Pill, right? Because wasn't that the first like commercially successful digital recording?
Was it? I didn't even know that.
Well, it was recorded on ADAT, so it's even pre-Pro Tools, but it was like, all right, digital is now going to be this way that we're going because we've proven that we can do it. I think her album was kind of the mark of that. And that's right around mid-90s, right?
Yeah, that was mid-90s. I had a buddy in San Francisco who was in a band that we used to play with a lot. His name was John Vanderslice, and he opened a famously analog studio in San Francisco. We were one of the first bands to record in there. And he brought in like a Neve console, and I think he had like a 24, like a 24 track machine that he had gotten. That legend has it was like from Brian Wilson's studio or something. Anyway,
Yeah.
And John was very famously like analog or die, and he's since in recent years he's come all the way to the other side of things, but. That studio, Tiny Telephone, became legendary kind of in indie circles and on the West Coast for that approach.
Okay.
So we recorded there back very, very early on, and a few times. And but when I left San Francisco at the end of the 2001 or whatever, I was just recording on a very early version of Pro Tools at home. And trying to do a full, you remember, you played on that album, that Miles from Mariana album. And so, that was kind of the first all digital thing that we did. And, that was a big, epic kind of like my first solo thing. And it's actually, I think it's on Spotify now, but... Still under 1,000 listens for every song kind of thing,
More than once I would talk to Ken on the phone. He's like, yeah, I'm just recording vocals in my closet, Everything, like at home, everything I need is...
Yeah.
I just go in different places to play my guitar, go in different places to sing.
Yeah.
So that was late 90s. You started doing Pro Tool stuff.
Yeah.
And So kind of how did that progress?
I mean, at first, it was kind of like Pro Tools in the studio, and I didn't have I was very low tech myself. I didn't even have a computer yet myself, and so it was just sort of looking over the shoulder of, our friend is the engineer and kind of saying, "Oh, cool, we can cut and paste this shit. This is great." It's very easy. But it was we were still very much kind of like in that late grunge kind of sensibility where it was just get down, guitar, bass, drums, couple vocals, and you're pretty much
recording,
couple overdubs, and that's it.
Yeah.
So we weren't really taking advantage of it, and I think that the sound quality in those days, everything sounded pretty flat, and so it was. I don't think whether it was we did it at the time. Analog was just better suited for the type of stuff we were doing, but it opened up a lot of possibilities because when you have endless tracks, suddenly, you can start like thousands of other, sad people in dark studios can start thinking about doing their opus and using 128 tracks at a time.
Yep.
And inevitably, it's a colossal waste of time because
you get away from the core of the song at that point.
Not only that, everything just gets too overwhelmingly dense. I mean, you don't need an acoustic guitar that plays through the whole song. Mm-hmm. What you need is an acoustic guitar that plays for 4 bars and then gets out entirely.
Yeah.
Like you start learning, especially as I've gotten older and recordings I do now, take a lot, I appreciate empty space and just relief for the ear. Now, I say that, and then the first song on this new record, Yellow Boat, is the exact opposite of that, right?
Well,
but
sometimes you gotta.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't know,
Well, so I'm the guy that goes super dense, right?
Yeah.
So these days I'm not recording as much guitar stuff, but I'm still doing kind of coming out of the pandemic, right? We're in 2022, end of it. Do a lot of electronic music, right? Because I have in Pro Tool or in Logic, got 1,000, 5,000. I don't know how many instruments are in there, right? And then all the effects so you can manipulate them, right? So I've been stuck on the harp sound and how many ways I can add different ring modulators and shit like that. But the point being, it's fun to explore that stuff, but I do find the same thing. As I'm going, it gets so dense, even across 16, 20 tracks, that I finally get to a point where I stop. The music comes to a stop and there's just one line, and it's the relief. I'm I shouldn't need that, right? And so now I'm going through and I'm cutting stuff out because it's unnecessary. It's just more ear candy that's just going to get lost in the mix ultimately.
It's the process is now it's like painting.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like.
That's a good point.
It's not like putting a band in the studio, miking it up and saying, okay, go.
Mm-hmm.
The process for me anyway, and the guys that I'm working with now, I've got these terrific collaborators in Philadelphia. It's really like a painting because what happens is I start with the core of a song, and that is the most important part, right? Mm-hmm. You start with something that you feel good about, but I used to be in this mode 20 years ago where I was like, oh, it's got to turn out like this, and we got to keep trying this song, and if we didn't get it, we got to do it again. And now I realize there'll always be more songs.
Yeah.
And if we take this song in a completely different direction, that's cool. Let's just see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like if you start with some core components to the song, the main thing really is always going to be the melody, the vocal, the rhythm, and around that it can be anything. Mm-hmm. And once you've sort of settled on where you want to be with those elements, I think it's you kind of open things up. The other thing is that I've been doing lately, and that's what this new record is all about. And this really came about during early, I'll call it early COVID or early pandemic.
Okay, yeah. That's fair. It was 2
right.
years long, right?
When it was really lockdown time.
Yeah.
Is taking songs, and because I got into Ableton, as I was saying, as a new sort of sketch pad after years of using Pro Tools and stuff. Mm-hmm. I started using Ableton because I realized that a quicker way to get ideas down, and you can use a lot of electronic instruments and effects and different things that you want to try experimentally. And so, but the other really cool thing is because it's such a quick sketchpad, I would do songs and then I would be like, I could just sit back and come back to it and be like, you know what? It wants to take that melody's not done. Mm-hmm. You know how like when you write you guys have been songwriters for a long time.
Yeah.
You write a song and your natural inclination is to keep it into a structure that you're familiar with, verse, chorus, verse, and you know exactly how long the verse should be or relatively.
Yeah.
As opposed to, and you might feel like that melody could continue to meander in a completely different direction, but it would go outside of that structure. And so you kind of hem it in, right?
Yeah.
Whereas during lockdown, I was like, let's just see where it goes.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing, it's almost like the complete, when you think about our entire existence, when we're all locked down, we're like, maybe we should all just like take a trip and see where
Go a different direction.
See where it all goes.
So we had that discussion about instruments, not forcing an
I was
instrument
thinking the same thing.
to be, Sikora his background is, a roadie, professional roadie. He's probably had his hands on more instruments than you and I, combined. But we were talking how some instruments, even right off the shelf or right out of the box or whatever, you tune them down or you an alternate tuning, and they just don't take to it. They don't sound as good as they did maybe in a standard tuning or a down a half step. Don't force it. Excuse me. Don't force it to do something it doesn't want to do. So the songs, we actually, for the songs we did, we had some parts where we were like, well, the end of the song just stops. Like, shouldn't it go on some more? And then we're like, no.
We've served the song. The song. So I have two comments about that. Yeah. So I learned about this from Johnny Resnick's tech. And we had just got an endorsement with Taylor Guitars. And so they shipped over 12 guitars, all nice ones, 800, 900 series. And John has, every song's a different tuning, right? Like that's that Goo Goo Doll sound. Mm-hmm. And so now you have to decide what guitars are going to what tunings. And something like Iris, which is literally B, 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 D, right? Like that's the tuning. Not every guitar is going to take to that. So you have to try a few guitars and find the one that it sits the best in.
Yeah.
And so that got me thinking, with some of my own guitars, there's sometimes when I drop it down a step, it just doesn't sound good. It doesn't ring anymore. And there's some that I put in a standard out of drop and it doesn't sound good. And so find out what the instrument wants to be, treat it like its own entity and what it wants to do, and then adjust to that. And I think the song is the same way. I think we struggled with a few songs, especially early on, the second one on the first EP, where we did like 10 different takes of it in different parts and different, let's do this here. And maybe it's because what you were saying, we couldn't figure out what the core of the song was, right? And once we kind of determined that, it made the song easier to figure out. But a song is its own entity, right? And so let it do what it wants to do and just try to help it along. But you're right. There's this weird thing that happens between what I think I want to happen and what actually should happen in the song. Yeah. And so there's this melody. Okay, now there's going to be a counter melody after that. But what if I do a harmony underneath that? And all of a sudden I've gotten away from what does it need to be as opposed to what do I hear up here that, it is an interesting process. Yeah, man.
I got really excited because we have one song in particular on the album. Well, we have a few that go in completely crazy directions, but there's one, The Zoo, which is the second song. I probably have, and I've got old versions on Ableton of I've got this evolution of the arrangement of that song that is crazy, and and ultimately, there's a part of it that is now kind of like the climax or outro of it that was originally kind of like a repeating chorus part. But I realized the song doesn't want to go there until the very end of the song and stuff. So you gotta just kind of throw out any kind of preconceived notion of structure and arrangement and just see where it wants to go. And finally, I was like, and we tried it a lot of different ways ultimately before we decided to land where it has. And somehow it just seems like listening back on it now that it's done, and mastered and everything, and we listen to it and we're like, we nailed it. And I don't know how we did because it was through so many iterations, but it was like, it's finding, letting that melody go where it wants to go, letting the mood settle in weird ways that you wouldn't ordinarily do it. So it just takes it out of sort of a normal, I guess, pop structure or whatever you would call it.
Yeah. So song structure is interesting as well. And I wanted to comment, well, a couple comments. So I do find myself very, very quickly going A, B, A, B, C, A, B, or A, B, A, B, C, B, right? It's just a go-to. And that gives me some sort of direction. But you're right, not every song wants to go there. And we ran into that problem as well where, is it Filtered Happiness or one of the songs on the second EP? Yeah, like you said, it ends at the end of a verse. Mm-hmm. Like the verse comes to the end and it just stops. It's like, no, but the song is done at that point. One thing I keep in mind, though, is there are, we have musical terminology and we have tools for a reason. And so I think back to the first Lisa Marie Presley album, and the record executives didn't know why it wasn't doing so well, because it was a decent album. The recording was just so-so, but it was a decent album. But there was something about the songs that weren't there. And what I realized is, like, I'm sure if you looked at the wave file, it was solid in the song, solid, and there was no stop break. There was no dynamic moves. Right. So, like, keeping in mind, and we did this. I did this at least a lot in Cancel the Sun. I don't know if we ever talked about it, but in almost every song, there's a spot where it stops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, silence, 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 then kick back in, and having those little breaks in there that we sometimes forget about because we get so caught up in the song and forgetting, like you said earlier, about silence. And silence is a tool, and it doesn't get used nearly as much as it probably should. Yeah. Because you go to silence, all of a sudden the impact is that much bigger when you come back, and it gives you a second to breathe. So I need to keep in mind, like, we can talk about musical training as well, like my background in music school. Like, keep in mind, even though we're meant to learn the rules and the tools and then break all of them, the tools are still there for a reason. Yeah. And so many teachers would say, now that you know everything, break all the rules. Like, I don't know, man. We need some of those rules. There's a reason.
Yeah, and I love, like, moments of just subtlety and musicality. And, of course, growing up starting my music career in the grunge era, there was no subtlety. It was like
in your face.
Yeah. It was hammering over the head. But, like, now I'm like, I'm just, like, obsessed with, major seventh chords and shit like this. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Just because, I find myself going to different, just colorings of chords, or, just because it suggests something either in the melody or in the harmony of the melody that's little melancholy or whatever it might be. Yeah. But the subtlety of it is something that I really appreciate. Even like I grew up. The reason I started playing guitar was because of Led Zeppelin. Like, probably half the guitarists out there, right? So, and you listen to, like, Since I've Been Loving You by Jimmy Page, and that solo at the beginning where it alternates between, he's changing his pickups, between, like, his bridge pickup, his neck pickup. But when he's doing those little runs on the neck that are really, really subtle, but they're like, that's the shit that I loved, because and then he kicks it in, and then he does, the ridiculous runs or whatever. And of course, I don't play guitar anything like Jimmy Page, but that's the subtlety, or even the moments of just little harmonic, like, just like a keyboard that goes to a slightly dissonant kind of thing for a second that sets the stage for something else. Yep. And you got to be kind of a muso to kind of get into that shit, right? Yeah. I feel like it's lost on a lot of people, but I also think that the people that get into it are the people that, you can actually have a conversation like this with, right? Yeah.
So Sakura's big into that, because when I talk about going into the studio, which, it's not really like everybody packs into a van and goes to a studio, because a lot of people do it at home. But going into the studio, I go with a very small idea, maybe sometimes 2 chords. And I'm like, all right, Jason,
Yeah.
figure out the rest. But he's big into, well, I like the way that sounds, but there's no closure. Like we're going from here to there, and it's not completing the thought. Let's do this, and then we can go here, and then come back. Stuff like that to me doesn't. It's not stuff that I normally think about, and I don't know how popular or what you have to do to become considered a songwriter. I mean, yeah.
You have to write songs.
I've written songs, but it's not like I would walk around town saying, oh, yeah, I'm a songwriter in IT. You know what I mean? So I bring very basic tidbits. And my favorite part is the grouping of musicians. Like,
Oh, dude.
That's Jason.
I love that.
Ken's done some stuff with us. My buddy, Neil Tate, whoever it might be. When you bring different people in, it's like different ingredients. They may not hear the song the same way, even though they're participating in what they play shows that. It might change just one little thing that you're like, man, you really opened up that song.
Well, there's one song in particular, I think you came in, it was C major, A minor, E, in a slow 3 feel. Dun, 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 dun.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not how the song turned out at all.
Nope.
Like all we kept was the C, the A, and the E move, and nothing else.
Yeah.
But yeah, that goes back to using the tools, right? Like I know how to resolve a 5-to-1, right? And I know what it feels like if you don't have a proper resolution. And I know the modes well enough to know I have these options available. Let's figure out which one's the best. Speaking of major 7, my new favorite is a major 9 sus2 chord. I don't know why.
I love that too because it's dissonant. It's awesome.
Yeah. Especially if you have a chord voicing that puts the major 7 right next to the root, so you have that
Yes.
half step in there.
You know who loved that shit was I don't know if you're into this guy's playing at all, but he's brilliant. Is Dave Rawlings with Gillian Welch. I mean,
I know the name,
and it's all acoustic stuff, but he would play this. He would always play like seconds and ninths and shit, and it was, in the greatest way. All on acoustic guitar too.
And while I knew about these notes, and I've always liked to use seconds and sixths in like the blues scale, I think those are great go-to notes, especially when you're on the 4 chord or the 5 chord. They're generally overlooked, and I think it. I don't want to call it musical maturity, right? But like as we get older and we listen to enough music, the more complex things don't seem as complex. We understand them and appreciate them more. So throwing in things like sevenths, which I rarely, like even when we write, it's very much triads, power chords, right? Yeah. But then throwing in those little extras, because we've evolved musically in our heads over time, where I didn't do that stuff in high school, and even through my 20s and 30s didn't do it as much. I forget what my next thought was going to be. In terms of your musical tastes, do you have any musical training, any background?
I mean, I took piano lessons as a kid, so I can read music, but I don't really use that. And then I started playing guitar when I was like 17.
Okay.
So, but largely self-taught. I mean, I took lessons for like a year. And I've always been very insecure about my technical abilities. Mm-hmm. And, I played guitar in bands throughout the 90s. And, for a large chunk of that, I was the only guitar player. I was like a power trio. So I got by with largely power chords and little flourishes, but I was never a guy that could like do what I really wanted to do on the guitar. Right.
Yeah.
And I also didn't spend nearly enough time looking back on trying to innovate or develop a sound that wasn't derivative of something that, you know what I mean?
That's an interesting point. Yeah.
Like I can appreciate obviously today. So I'm the guys I'm working with now. I'm working in the studio. Excuse me. I'm just getting over COVID, by the way.
Oh, fun.
But I've tested negative for several days in a row, so don't worry.
I've only got COVID, I think, once, and the few times that everybody around me got it, I was fine.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the booster.
Jason's like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
We're in a confined room together now.
Thanks a lot.
No, I mean, it's back on the rise a little bit, but what?
Yeah, no.
I'm
good.
over worried about it.
I'm good. This cough's going to go on for weeks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's fair.
But no, I'm working in the studio called Minor Street Recordings in Philadelphia, and Brian McTeer is a friend of mine who is the studio owner and a great collaborator. He and Matt Poirier, who is the engineer on it. Two of the greatest collaborators you could have. It's the same thing you were just talking about. It's very hard to find the people that really jive with you in terms of when you're trying to do something interesting and different, you know. And so, but Brian is really interesting because as a guitar, like he's, you know, our age, so he has the same kind of reference points and sensibilities, and he also owns a studio with like an incredible like selection of amps and guitars and all kinds of stuff, and he loves to go in there and play around with it. So he ended up playing a ton of guitar on my record, as well as just being a primary collaborator, and he naturally uses his own custom tunings and different things, and he is not a technical player at all either, but he adds things that are a very interesting voice and unique voice.
Yeah.
And we actually started this whole process right before COVID. And I had a guitar player who is another friend of mine who's also one of the best technical guitar players I've ever, not just that I know personally, but that I've ever seen. He's just a spectacular player. He played on the first few recordings with us, and then we decided ultimately that we were going to move on and do some different songs or whatever, but we also decided that we didn't want that approach. We wanted a completely different approach. Brian put all this stuff on just with, you know, these different kinds of open tunings and different things that he would do, and it just created a completely different feel and voice. And he has his own things where he would do this sort of 16th note trill on the guitar, and you now hear it on the record in a lot of places, and it's very almost orchestral the way it comes across, and the effect is really this massive sounding thing, but it's completely unique unto him. So, you know, anyway. I forget how we even got on that.
Well, going back, I think to Brandon's point, something I was going to mention, you hit on it, was working with other people, right? That's one of the best ways to grow, right? And they say always surround yourself with musicians better than you, right? Because that's how you're going to learn.
That's not very difficult for me.
or me.
Well, I think most people feel that way, right? Because especially nowadays, I don't know what's with this next generation, but the amount of like virtuosos at 16 years old making TikTok videos is mind-blowing.
It is.
Now, whether they can write a song or not, who knows? But technically, they're amazing. But yeah, surrounding yourself with people who are going to take different approaches and talk, like, instead of being a great technical player, good part writers, right? Because those guys, like you were saying, have a very different approach to. The guitar is just a tool. It's not an instrument anymore. It's how far can I push the limit?
Well, that's the whole point, and that's what I'm saying. It's a painting.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you can approach it like a Jackson Pollock painting and just throw like sound at it and see where you're at. Or you can take very distinct parts and say, I'm going to be as economical as possible, and each part is going to be a critical element, but we're going to try to limit our palette. But, you know, you're right. There's 1,000 guys that can play an Eddie Van Halen solo now.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
But there's not, like, someone who can add emotionally to the song somehow.
Yeah. Exactly. So when it comes to writing a song, do you have kind of like a template approach, or is it every time you write a song, it's a different starting point for you?
Well, it's interesting that I think I always start with, not always, but 90% of the time, I start with, you know, a melody and maybe a couple of chords. And then it's really about, you know, and I've, you know, like everyone else, I use the voice notes here now, and but kind of, I've always got a number of ideas going at once, and I try to piece stuff together. But I also will oftentimes, I find now, piece stuff together and I'd be like, oh, great, that works. It works as a complete thought. I rarely have lyrics right off the bat. I take a lot of time to do the lyrics later.
Okay.
And so, but the music can come together somewhat quickly. But then what I end up doing is I put it aside, I come back to it, and then I'm like, oftentimes now I'll say, well, that's too tidy. That works. That's just.
What was I trying to do? What was my point?
Well, it's like, sure, that works, but it doesn't excite me.
Right.
Oh,
In other words, yeah, it works. And not only that, there's 2 hooks. I can see how this works, but and sure, I could set it aside and do like my 3-minute pop songs or whatever. That would work.
Yeah.
But I'm not interested.
Yeah.
So what I try to do is figure out when I play, just playing it on a acoustic guitar to myself, like what part of the song am I? It's a weird thing, man. What part of the song are you actually looking forward to getting to when you play it yourself?
Oh, yeah.
You know? And when you finally get to that, you're like, okay, maybe I should just take that and figure out what makes that part of it good and how would I keep it interesting from there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's always it starts with the I think sort of the same kind of thought where I'm looking for something a little bit interesting, but I kind of take things in different directions now than I used to.
Is there any trace of that process dating back to San Francisco, the Keeners, or back then it was like, hey man, it sounds good. Let's record it.
The thing is, man, it's like when you have a band, when you have an actual band, and you can take that tidy idea and immediately electrify it, and crank it up. Some songs immediately come to life, and other ones don't. And so some of those songs, I would never let it sort of germinate. I would never like do what I do now. But some of those songs are obviously gonna like work in a band setting, and other ones don't. So
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the next step at the time was just to take it to the band and see like if,
How can we fix it?
well, or did it come to life?
Yeah.
Or not? And then if it does, I can flesh it out lyrically and all that shit. But
I want to bounce back to in the studio. I had only been to maybe 2 studios in my entire musical career, and we were always amongst friends, so it seemed more comfortable than business-like. Like this is look, we got to do this, and look, I need you here by 8 and out by. And then I started recording with Jason, which should be comfortable, right? You're in a man cave and you're recording stuff. So it's my part. I play my bass. It ends. I go to take it off. He's like, all right, again. All right. Play it. And I get to the end. I go to take my bass off. All right, one more time. Like 6, 7 times. Like, do you do that yourself, or are you that hard on not that he's hard on me, but when you go to record, are you like,
when we're in the studio,
or at home, and you're like, oh man, that was good, but look, I'm gonna do 3 more just in case I do something that I catch something different.
Kind of over recording for the sake of having options.
Okay,
Right.
so here's what we're about to do. I've got studio time booked for the last weekend in January coming up, and I've been really, really fortunate in that I've had access to these incredible musicians in Philly who played on the record and are coming in the studio with me in January. These are guys that are in like the band The War on Drugs and stuff, and their drummer Charlie Hall's great guy, great drummer, and keyboard player is Robbie Bennett, who is just, both of them are. See, that's the thing. When you throw a song out at somebody and then you kind of see what they bring to it, you know very quickly whether or not you're on the same like wavelength.
Yep.
And if you are, suddenly you develop this musical trust, and it's a rare thing. I mean, it's hard to find. I mean, you can be playing with guys for like years and years without it. I mean, but for the sake of convenience, you just keep playing with these people or whatever. But then other times you play with somebody a couple of times and you're like, damn, like every idea they have enhances it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
So with these guys, besides the fact that they're just great guys and great players, you know, they also seem to be musically just on the same wavelength.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to go in the studio, and the approach is going to be, I've got a couple of new tunes that we're going to try to do, but we're going to take the sort of, you know, the Beatles Get Back kind of approach, where we're going to say, all right, you know, and by the way, I've seen that, I don't know, like 7-8 times, all 8 hours. You know?
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I'm about 4 hours into it, man. It's long.
Oh, it's long, yeah. I signed a petition to get the extended version of that shit. So, but anyway, you know, the cool thing about it is that you have all these different people that have different ideas to bring, and you can start with a really organic idea. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to bring the core of a song, or a couple songs, and I want to see what they do with it. And I think what we're going to try is 2 days of like building from scratch. And then we're going to take an approach and we're going to say, okay, we got that down. Now let's do it a completely different way and try it that way. Now let's do it a third time, completely different. And it's not like, I'm not going to give them the idea. I'm going to say, what else you got? You know, let's try this. Or maybe if I have an idea, I'll be like, all right, let's try more like a groove on this one. Let's try this. Let's make this one like start with nothing but drums and keys. This one will start with just you know, a guitar. This one will start with bass.
Yeah.
And I want to, like, you know, that'll give us options. Mm-hmm. We'll have different feels because that we can pick and choose from, and even cut and paste together if we want to.
Yeah.
When we did the Zoo, that was the one. Charlie was the drummer on that, and he tried a bunch of different things experimentally in different sections. And ultimately, we did have a lot of different things we could choose from, depending on where we thought the song was meandering to.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was like that.
Yeah. So I think it kind of goes unspoken, but I think a lot of bands do that. So that radio show I listened to, their theme song is basically from a 90s grunge band. And the version they play as their intro is different than what you hear on the radio. And after listening to the guys talk about the song, there's like 20 versions of it. And one of them, the harmonica's doing the melody, and then one's the singer, then one's the acoustic version, and then one's, you know, something, they have a banjo in there or whatever. But you have all these different versions that you can then pull from. And in their case, it worked out great because they now get royalties from a radio show paying them for a version that didn't even make the radio. Right. But yet it still brings light to them. But in terms of, so my approach is partly just my own, but also like just spending time in studios with bands. And a lot of my gigs in LA were just, we need you to come restring some guitars. So you sit in the studio while they're recording and just watch. And that's what producers did. All right, go ahead, let's run a take. They get it done. All right, run that again. Let's run it again. And you run it until you get it perfect, but don't discredit the previous takes. Because there's usually going to be something good in the first take or two. I learned that on Faith Hill. Michael Landau, they had doing part, and he screwed something up right on the first take. Like, all right, we're coming back to that. Because that screw up ended up making the final mix. Yeah. Right? But he still did 4 more takes and nailed it. But the first take was still, they just copied that piece in there. So I like that approach of having some options. But our approach was also very much, we're not a band, right? We're just 2 dudes that are spending 2 hours a week throwing this together with built-in drum tracks, trying to make something happen. My approach, I think, as a band would be a little bit different, right? Because it's a different level of collaboration where I've never even met our drummer, right? Brian. So I was taking a very produced approach to it. Like, we're producing these songs. We're not writing these as much as we are producing them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I take a more of that. Well, yeah, I don't take an approach like it's a band either anymore. I mean, I don't have a regular band, and and I think when you do have a band, actually, you feel like everyone's got to have a part. So if you don't have a band, you don't have any of that kind of like external kind of like, you know, well, what's he going to do?
Yeah.
What's she going to do? Or you can't. So I would rather like just take it as a production. Like, again, it's all the sort of painting metaphor where it's just, you just throw different ideas down. Ultimately, some are going to survive and some aren't. But
Yeah.
yeah, you throw more ideas down than you need, for sure, from a production standpoint.
Yeah. Makes
And
sense
then
to have that.
yeah, and then you kind of mix by subtraction.
Yep.
Or figure out what's the most exciting idea clearly, and then either build off of that or just clear the other shit out.
Yep. So this, we saw this coming, right, where everybody's going to be making albums in their homes, and sure enough, I mean, I think what even Billie Eilish's first album was in GarageBand or something, or maybe it was in Logic, because you can get the Logic files, right, the projects, and mix it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was her brother on a laptop just recording her.
Mm-hmm.
Making millions of dollars now, right? Or, I don't know, maybe the record company's taking most of it, most likely. But so the ability for anybody now to write music whenever, wherever they want. Do you see this as a good thing or a bad thing or kind of a mixed bag?
It's a mixed bag. I mean, look, I'm a music snob.
Mm-hmm.
Brandon knows this well. I'll tell you who really knows it is my brother-in-law. It's hilarious, the banter that he and I have. But I am a self-proclaimed music snob, which means that I hate 99% of the shit that's out there.
Fair enough.
And I'm not really shy about saying it.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the stuff I love. And like, to a degree where I need to know everything about the band, understand their process, everything, you know.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
And so it's a good thing that people can make music, but then there's just that much more shit to sift, that people have to sift through to find something good.
That was kind of my feeling as well, is that's great that everybody can do it, but now Spotify is mostly stuff that you're not going to listen to.
Right. It is. And that actually makes, I mean, when I'm still like, as an indie music snob, I'm very much into finding new music. Mm-hmm. And so I will, and I do rely on Spotify quite a bit, you know, just searching through that.
And the algorithm, the suggested listens is a big one for me,
Right. And so it's the most recent, and I'll sometimes take it in odd directions, right? Like I'll just go on a classical music binge, or lately I found this playlist called Alternative R&B.
Okay.
And because I just want to get out of indie rock mode.
Yeah.
And because that's the point. When you're making paintings as opposed to like saying I'm in a rock band or something, your stuff could come out sounding anything but rock.
Yeah.
You know. And you know, I don't consider myself in the rock genre to begin with. You guys have always been more in that.
I definitely lean more rock, yeah.
Right. But I still do seek out new music frequently and kind of use that as, you know, to fuel ideas in terms of just a sound or approach or feeling or whatever. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know. I also can get that inspiration really from. So I just finished watching Atlanta. Have you seen that show?
Awesome. Fantastic.
Atlanta?
I just finished it last night,
Fantastic.
dude. The finale.
So good.
I am so glad that you saw it because I've got no one to talk to about it.
I feel like
what's it on?
It's Donald Glover.
He is so underrated as. I can't believe more people don't talk about Atlanta. It is so well done.
Well, and here's what I love about it. It's because his approach. I'm just interested in his approach and how he thinks creatively, because I feel like it's kind of the similar ways to the way I think about songs, right? Mm-hmm. I want to see where they're going to go, and I don't want to be bound to anything. And he's created the surreal aspect of that show is not bound to anything.
It's very dreamy sequences.
It's surreal. It's dreamy. You know, you don't know what's reality, what's not reality at times, and yet sometimes it's so like real. And I love that kind of juxtaposition, you know, and because the fact is, man, that's when you start trying to create something of artistic value, you gotta like let things start floating in any direction they're going to go. And that's what he's achieved on that show. And it's the same sensibility that I think you can apply to, you know, anything you're trying to create artistically.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not like it has to be like music to, you know, inspired by music to create music. I think it's sort of inspired by an approach more than anything else. And that's sort of that surrealist painting kind of thing again.
Yeah. So one of the things, speaking of TV shows, one of the things that I find myself doing is when I'm watching shows, I'll generally have a guitar in my hand. And I'm really just running warm-up exercises nonstop, right? Just to keep my fingers moving. But I do find I start finding the notes, like the top notes or some notes that are in the music of the show I'm watching, which has given me a different approach. And I think that's where I started getting into like the major seventh and the flat twos, is because all of a sudden you hit the note, but then you hear like the flat two underneath it, which makes the major seven, and all of a sudden like, and they're like doing major chords across like, you know, a flat third up. You know, it's in C, now it's an E flat major, now it's an F sharp major, now it's an A flat major. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? But it works.
Yes.
Right. And to me, I know those guys aren't necessarily thinking out the box because it can all be explained in music theory, but it's not an approach I would ever take. So I find when I'm goofing around now, it's like, oh, that thing I heard was great. I can take a major chord and move it up a minor third and play it again. And that's where, and I would have, part of my training has kept me somewhat in a box. And I see these things on TV and it just pulls you completely out of it.
Yeah.
And so trying to apply some of that sensibility, or that freedom, I guess I should say, of, I need to emote something, right? And then the other thing too, I also need to tell a story with the music. And a lot of the stuff I write electronically is just, it's just music, right? There's no lyrics. How do I write a story with just some orchestras of sound without classical training? Like, and so that's been an interesting process. But yeah, pulling from other sources, whether it's musically or just, you know, visually or whatever, and trying to create something outside your comfort zone sometimes.
It's funny you say that because so we had a song that I was working, we spent a long time in the studio working on it, and we ultimately shelved it. It didn't come out on this record. Maybe we'll revisit it. But it was sort of like that, man. It started on this, it started with like I'm trying to remember, just a C to an F major 7 to like an E minor 7, and then it went up a minor third, and suddenly we were doing the same pattern up, starting on E flat, then it was up on F sharp, and it came all the way around. It was like, you know, the circle of fifths. It came all the way around. The
circle of minor thirds.
Right.
Exactly.
That's what it was. Until it resolved itself back where it started.
Yeah.
And I got really excited about that technically.
Yeah.
Until I realized halfway through or more than halfway through the recording process, I turned to Brian. I was like, dude, I need to stop nerding out on this. And realize that once I did my second modulation up, that's where I just need to stop and end. Because emotionally, as satisfying as it is for myself to circle back where I started, it doesn't serve like the emotional arc of the song. You know what I mean? I need to just, I can modulate up to that F sharp, and then at that point I need to like play it out. And also, we came up on this thing where the whole thing was this stunted beat, and it was really cool, and then it breaks out into this halftime, and then it just grooves the rest of the way, and that's where it needed to just live, and stay. And I was finally like, all right, you know what? Let's revisit this. Like, we got enough songs. Like, I was in like fucking Bruce Springsteen territory with all these outtakes and shit. I was like, let's just put this aside, man, and we'll come back to it. But that's where it needs to live, and so I need to like give up on my like perfect circle dream, you know what I mean? Or whatever. So, yeah, man, I know exactly what you mean, like technically. Yeah. But you know the other thing, so you're talking about like taking like just music electronically and telling like a story with it. Mm-hmm. I was just at this house concert 2 weeks ago, the day before I came down with COVID. Fortunately, nobody I was with got it. I was like, I think I had to report that. Oh, I've got an STD. Are you guys all right? But it was it was some of the guys in Wilco doing their side projects, and they were playing with, so like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Nels Klein, who's a guitar player for Wilco, who's a tremendous jazz player too, and his wife is a woman named Yuka Honda, who was in the band Cibo Mato back from the '90s, and they were really this sort of New York duo that did a lot of like sampling, and they were really ahead of their time on that kind of stuff. And so she was there and she played a set, which was all like, it was a 25-minute piece of her just on like samplers and Ableton Live or whatever she had on up on the laptop.
Yeah.
But she was playing all these samplers kind of live as she went and creating this really incredible kind of electronic just soundscape.
Yeah.
And no lyrics, no singing, nothing. And it was just like you went into this kind of, you kind of went into this kind of hypnotic kind of mesmerizing kind of like thing. Well, I was just sitting there breathing on everybody. But it was really, really cool. It was like by the time you were done, you were like, and it had this, she's been doing it for years and years. She's really good at like sort of riding a wave up and down with it emotionally. And it did kind of like tell a story, but it's all in your head, and everyone had their own story.
Yeah. Well, so it's funny, because I was talking to my therapist about inspiration, right? Like, and how sometimes I have motivation, but no inspiration, or the opposite, right? Where I don't have any like I have all these ideas, but I have no motivation. Like we were talking about the other day, Daigle, where the process of getting going seems too cumbersome to actually get to something. And or I'll have a mental block. I'll have inspiration for a part, right? And so I get this part down, and then I don't know where to go with it. And so I was talking about how one of the things that gets me back on track is what kind of story do I want to tell with that part, and where do I want this story to go? And so this story was going to be, I think I was kind of thinking about like war and like false personas, right? People who put on a straight face, but they really have evil intents. And so that was gonna be the story that I tell of a person that in the background there's all this, and that's kind of what the song turned out. The background, there's like this weird disharmonic thing going on, but it's very happy on front, and then I develop it. But I listen to it now and it's a completely different story. It's not that story anymore. And so I had to rename the song, and eventually I'll probably just can the song anyway, but it's fun for me, so I continue to do it. But everybody has their own interpretation of the story, but it's funny how mine will change over time. And even some of the Cancel the Sun stuff we did, like I know what some of the intent of it was, but now with a bigger lens looking back at it, it tells a slightly different story. Maybe I'm in a different part of my life now, so I hear it different, but it reminds me of the Roger Waters quote, and somebody asked him what, one of the songs, what does this song actually mean? And his response was, well, what do you think it means? And the reporter says, well, I think it means this, this, and this. And Roger says, well, then that's what it means. And the reporter, well, wait, no, what did it mean to you? And he goes, it doesn't matter what it meant to me. What did it evoke in you? That's the most important thing, not what I meant by it. So I like that approach. Like, I'm going to write what I want, the way I want to write it, and the way I feel something. And if somebody else feels it, cool. Yeah. Right. And that's also a great way. I had a hard time with this for a long time, and maybe you can comment on this, is detaching from my music, right? Don't hold on to it so much. It's just an idea, and there will be more ideas. But I create this thing, and it's like, that's mine, and I want to do this with it, and I want it to become this, and be able to just throw ideas away and not worry about what other people think about it, and just emotionally detach. And this is now its own thing, and I don't have to associate with it on a personal level anymore.
Yeah. No, what you said, like, it's an idea and there will always be more ideas. Yeah. I think that's something that I've had to learn, in order to let go of the reins of each individual song and really give into the process of collaboration, because now to me, it's exactly what you were saying. It's the most satisfying part of creating anything is the collaboration and finding the right group of people that can really make something out of this little germ of an idea. And I do believe, I mean, there's one thing I will say, like I think every songwriter or writer or anybody who creates something probably has this feeling in the back of their head like this will be the last thing I ever write because, you know, who knows if I'm going to dry up after this or whatever. But I know there will always be other ideas. There may not, it doesn't mean I can write another song that I'm really happy with, but there will always be an idea. If you have an idea and you have and you found a great group of collaborators who you think can help you grow the idea, then that gives you some comfort that you don't need to like feel like, you know, you need to, you know, carry it soup to nuts anymore. Yeah. And so I think that's a really important concept. And then also just letting it go into the world, like you said.
Yeah.
My problem is I let it go into the world and I'm like, it's like a tree falling in the forest. I don't know if anyone's picking it up.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we've collaborated on 2 songs where you sang. So
and more before that, where you played bass for me.
That was really long ago.
Long time ago. Yeah.
For the parts where you would sing, we had the music. We put the music down. I couldn't necessarily come up with any idea for lyrics, so we just send Ken the music, and waiting for him to send back even a rough copy is like the longest.
I know. It took a long time too.
No, and it's not even that. Like for me, I'm like, look, Ken, take this. You know, I know you got other things going on in your life. Just let me know when you're done with it, right? Like, take your time. And the minute I hang up, I'm like, he's not done yet. 10 minutes later. But that's always exciting to me because even though the music is laid down, it's written out. And in my mind, I'm like, well, I would sing here and I would do this right here. It's going to come back completely different from somebody else's point of view, even though the music is there. Like people hear different things. I would have never done that with that. I would have done this, and that to me is just the most thrilling thing to get something back. And I would have never done that.
Well, what's also interesting too is I think over time as we grow as musicians, going back and listening to our stuff and going, man, knowing what I know now, I should have done this, right? But now it's already out there.
Right.
And even our Cancel the Sun stuff, I listen to it now, and that's part of why I do so many takes is there's parts that I have on there that I don't like, right? And I wish I would have spent a few more minutes on that one note. But it's there now, and I can't do anything about it. But yeah, maybe that's why so many things get re-released. Maybe that's why they've re-released Star Wars 10 times, is because there's always something new that you can go back to. But that's part of detaching. Like, this song is what it is now. I don't need to...
When do you put it down? Like, does it become a never-ending project, or do you want it to be a song?
Jeff Beck said that if he could, he'd still be mixing Blow by Blow. Right. You know, like, and he's done 20 albums since then. Yeah. But yeah, when do you stop? when do you? But I think it's just a personal thing, right? When you're comfortable with what you're presenting in that moment is when you go, all right, we're good.
Well, yeah, I mean, this album that's coming out next month or February or whatever, it was like that. It's been going on for 3 years. So there's also a bit of like fatigue, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, it's just I could continue to tinker with this forever. But I would love other people to hear it now.
Yep.
You know, and so, but yeah, it's. I think especially given the approach that people take now, where you can tinker forever, you have to be able to say, all right, done, move on.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to try to make the next one quicker. You know, I don't want it to, and yet I felt like there was amazing value in allowing it to sit there and percolate and germinate and change in my head. You were talking about how you were going to write a lyric about one thing and it changed into something completely different. Yeah. One of the songs on the record was a completely different song. The basic track was the same. I had a different melody. I had completely different lyrics. And then I just rewrote the damn thing. And you know, And so it's because you're in a different place.
Yep.
Especially the longer it takes.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
So one of the things that I think, I don't know, I still stick to this, and this isn't about me, but maybe it's helpful. So the story, first of all, I love capturing a moment, right? That's part of, I think, what gets me into music, what gets me into doing podcast, video. Like, once this goes on YouTube, it will be there as long as YouTube is there, and probably beyond that. So a generation now can come back. Even if nobody listens to it now, or in the next 10 years or 50 years, maybe one person 100 years from now will listen to it and be like, wow, there was some interesting things. Maybe it speaks to them. And so I don't necessarily hold on to that, but that's kind of always my go-to is I don't need to be known. And I think that comes from, I heard a story about Bach. Bach wrote music, explored, 12-tone harmony, working for the church, was poor, didn't get paid anything. And it wasn't until about 100 years later that people started looking at his manuscripts or composers and went, holy crap, this guy was amazing. So he wasn't well known in his time, and yet he is one of the founders of Western harmony. And so that kind of takes the burden off of, like you said, tree fell in the forest. Mm-hmm. Nobody has to listen to anything I've done.
Yeah.
Right? I don't expect anybody to because there's so much stuff out there. But it's there. And if somebody runs into it 100 years from now and it means something to them, cool. If not, no big deal. What I've really I've struggled with a little bit is it's not about necessarily the end product all the time. It's about the journey. And it took us, 5 years to do Cancel the Sun stuff, granted limited time, but I have this thing now, but really the memories I have associated with it are the recording, the journey. And what we have out there on Spotify doesn't reflect necessarily what we went through to get there. And so there's part of this, I need to find solace in the process and not the end result.
Yeah.
If the end result's not perfect, doesn't matter. Did I have fun getting there? And if I did, then it was a success.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. It's right. And I think it speaks to a lot of people in our age group who have been doing this for a long time now. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally, like, my first band started 30 years ago now, right?
Yep.
And there's a whole group of people that decided that were doing it full time for a period of time, mm-hmm. and finally decided at a certain point, I got to go get a real job. I have to get, I want to start a family. I want to get married. I want to be an adult.
Yeah.
And I'll have to set this aside as a full time kind of pursuit. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean I can't continue to, do this as a hobby or try to even strive artistically in some way, right?
Yeah.
And maybe, and what we've been the beneficiary of is that technology has enabled us to, as it's evolved, we've been able to all of a sudden really have that access to try to really do something great with the full acceptance that we're not doing this for a living.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anymore, or trying to.
Yep.
And so that becomes unbelievably freeing in a way that you can take chances that you wouldn't if you're trying to rely on this. I do have friends from back in California who stuck with it and are making a living at it. Mm-hmm. But to some degree I don't know what their day-to-day reality is, so maybe they figured out a way around this. But the way I thought about it was the reason I didn't want to do it is because I don't want to be hemmed in and make so that every decision I made musically was based on, being able to make a buck at it. Because
it has to go through committee before it can be approved. Yeah.
Right. So because that will completely change the dynamic of what you're trying to do artistically if that's your main goal. And for me, ultimately, when I was making Mariana with You, mm-hmm. or doing, the Man in the Sea stuff or whatever, it was all just because I was trying to do something for myself different at the time or whatever. Mm-hmm. And this album that's coming out now, which, by the way, I should tell you, the name of it is Bettelina. It's under that's the name of the project, Bettelina. So when it comes out on Spotify, that's...
How do you spell that?
Dolina.
Okay.
Bedolina.
Okay.
And that it's the same thing. It's not, I didn't have to. It's not. I'm not trying to make money at it. But on the other hand, yeah, it is about the pursuit and the artistic pursuit and all that. On the other hand, I am just a human with a human ego.
Yeah.
And to some extent, I would love some recognition for it in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Well,
And not because I want to make money off it. I just need, because I'm a weak-minded, sad little person, I need somebody to tell me, this is really fucking good.
no. Well, that need for validation. So my dad was talking to him a couple of weeks ago, and just about music ideas, and like he had forgotten to cancel the Sun stuff that we did, so he's asking all about it. I'm like, dude, just go to my webpage. Like all of my stuff, I have one repository so that I know where to go. Right? I just made it for myself, and so I'm still waiting for that phone call where he goes, man, I listened to that song and it was great, and I haven't gotten it yet. But
Yeah.
in the back of my head, I'm like, all right, when's he gonna compliment me on that awesome guitar part?
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah. And it hasn't happened, and it probably won't happen.
Right.
There is something going back to what you were saying, and Brennan, I feel like we need to pull you in more, but
I'm good. I'm good.
again, I don't want to speak on behalf of the artists, and I don't want to necessarily break confidentiality agreements. But one of the conversations I think and things I've gleaned from Resnick, I really like Resnick as an artist and as a person. But when we were doing the album, or he was, I was there for a lot of it and helping him in 2008, Something for the Rest of Us. I know going into it, he really wanted to do something different. And he wanted to get a producer that was modern, and he wanted to make like a Muse type album and explore electronic instruments and more orchestras, but he's pigeonholed into Iris and Name and these ballads, and he wants to make a kick-ass rock album, and it doesn't fly with the record company. He's stuck.
He's typecast.
He's stuck
in a way.
chasing, and so when you need a sappy song for like the Transformers soundtrack, which we did, they went to Resnick. We need you to write a sappy, sad love song, and he's like, dude, all I want to do is rock out. And so his hobby, which has now become his job, has boxed him in, right? In order to make a buck and make a living, and not only that, but also pay for. This is one thing that I think people need to remember is when a band becomes famous, you're now a business. And most musicians aren't equipped to run a business. So he now has management, record label, lawyers, a team of people underneath him, touring people. Like he's now got 35 people around him that he also is responsible for paying for.
Yeah.
So he needs another hit, even though that's not what he wants to do. Lisa Marie Presley, her third album was nothing like her first two because she didn't want to do that anymore. She's like, I want to make like a really creepy, slow wine drinking under candlelight album. Fuck everybody else and pay for it myself. Good for her. She has the means, Elvis Presley money. But yeah, there is every now and then I'm like, I'm blessed that I didn't get that level of success that I was chasing in my 20s, because then I'd be stuck most likely in that box. Now, some musicians can break out of that, obviously, but if you're going to make some money, millions, and be doing world tours like Metallica, they made that Lulu album that nobody liked because it was, Lou Reed. And they're like, but you're Metallica. Fuck Lou Reed. But that was what they wanted to do at the time. I doubt the record company wanted anything to do with that album. But musically, that's what they wanted to do. So even Metallica is stuck trying to rewrite Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, and Master of Puppets for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. And Kirk Hammett, when I met him in '99, he's like, man, all I listen to is jazz. I play lots of jazz these days. It's like you'd never know that he was a big jazzo because he's playing pentatonic licks all night long.
Yeah.
So there is something, like, I think, freeing about not being under the pressure of the dollar when you're creating art.
You think about how few bands have achieved that kind of artistic freedom.
Yep.
And it's like, every kid who wants to be a professional athlete, it's like, one in a bazillion. Mm-hmm. And so the same thing for bands who've actually achieved artistic freedom.
Yep.
In a true sense.
Yep.
The whole dream was to be the Beatles, who could do anything they wanted to, but it was a different time. Yep. You can name on one hand in the rock world who's achieved that now. The ones that I like bands that I admire most, like Radiohead or whatever, have somehow managed to do that.
So Radiohead, I commented earlier, Muse. It
Yeah.
seems like Bellamy can do whatever he wants, and they're going to pay for it.
Yeah, but I mean, most, even the Metallicas of the world, right? They have this unbelievable pressure of expectation on them.
Yep.
And granted, they have all the money they need, or what I assume. I don't know what they're.
Well,
I don't know how much
so
money
we
they
can talk
actually
about that
take
off air. I've heard a couple stories, but they're doing well now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there was a time where they were a little on shaky ground.
But you talk about your buddy in Goo Goo Dolls. I mean, that's a perfect example, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, most of his money, I'm guessing, you know better than me.
Yeah.
But I'm sure most of his money comes in from royalties from one song.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, and they've had a number of gold records or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's the problem. He's got this huge nut, man.
Yep.
He's got all these people that rely on him. And the pressure, I'm sure, is huge for him. And so he can't take artistic chances, or if he can, he has to do it on the side or whatever. I'm sure it sucks for him. But on the other hand, he's made a living at it for his whole
and
career.
he gets to support his family and his friends around him, and so it works.
Yeah.
But there is still something as a musician, as an artist, an artiste, if you will, you want to explore, right? That's the whole reason you got into it. Yeah. And so I kind of joke, computers were my hobby and music was my career as a roadie, and I just flipped those. And I can explore now more musically than I ever have before. Even in roadie bands and stuff, we're still like, we have to do it this way, and we're doing this, and I have all these other people, and now I can do whatever the heck I want, and not have to worry about paying for anything with it or pleasing anybody with it. Mm-hmm. I just have to worry about myself. One other thing I'd written down, because songwriting is interesting to me, and I learned one thing from John Foreman. We can talk about it in a second. Do you have any exercises that you do to stay motivated, inspired, kind of keep everything lubed up in your songwriting process? So for some people, it's like buying new gear, right? And some people, it's, whatever, a new studio setup. For some people, it's, listening to different music. What tools do you use to keep yourself moving forward and inspired?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a little bit of feast and famine. Like, I'll go months without doing anything, and then I'll have a new batch that'll come together. But it can get kind of, I guess, jump-started with new technology. Like, at the beginning of COVID, I shifted over to Ableton as a primary tool, and that definitely kind of gave me a ton of ideas and just ways to take little snippets of ideas and try to develop them. And I think before that, the thing that really jump-started me back in 10 years ago and really changed the way I did things, because before I would do the same thing I do now, in the sense that I would get little snippets of ideas, but I think I would always end up doing them in the same way, like, just put guitar and bass and drums on it or whatever.
Yeah.
But the thing that broke me out of that was, I think, getting into just getting out of the rock world. And I think it was, believe it or not, it was like listening to Lana Del Rey's first record at the time.
It's a great. I just put that back on the other day. It's an amazing album.
Yeah, but what really got me about it was, it is a great record, but was the production. And there was a guy who did a lot of the production on that record named Emil Haney, and who I don't even know what he's doing these days, but I started to get really interested in him and his process. And I think he came out of the sort of the Kanye school of production, or maybe that'd be insulting to him. I don't know. But anyway, well, now it might be. But
no,
but nonetheless, it opened me up to a whole different world of like kind of production, and how to get it, start really learning and understanding the latest technology at the time, and in terms of using sampler plugs and different sequencing and different ways of just using, just creating beats, basically. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so it really jump-started me because I had like probably at the time 20 songs that were just sitting there waiting for to do something with. And ultimately I started to get really into the production of it and started to buy a bunch of plugs and other things, updated my Pro Tools and all that stuff, and tried to really, like, in the most rudimentary way, apply some of those ideas to some of these songs. Yeah. I took all of those demos, which were, you know, not impressive, but at least we're trying to do some interesting new stuff, and ended up working with a couple of producers that I got hooked up with in Philadelphia. One of whom was actually headquartered in, he actually was lived in Paris, France, but he's a Philly guy. Okay. And so he and I really hit it off, and he ended up producing a record that came out for me in like 2018, and took a lot of those ideas, and they kind of morphed over time, but that really jump-started me. And so so those, as a tool, getting into a lot of these different plugs and a lot of these different you know, sort of the latest batch of stuff that was happening at the time, definitely jump-started me. And then this record was probably jump-started all the more by Ableton, and just shifting over to that as sort of a primary creative palette, I guess you could say. Even though ultimately we would take all these ideas in Ableton and throw them back into Pro Tools for ultimately mixing and stuff like that. Yeah.
I went from Pro Tools is what I learned on. And so I did an album with the drummer of Goo Goo Dolls, and, you know, I had all the greatest gear in the world at my disposal, right? And so I learned Pro Tools. But there was something freeing about moving to Logic, where I didn't have to think about all the preferences and all the little settings in the background and syncing this and that. I love Pro Tools, but there's a lot to it if you let it. And so sometimes going back to just GarageBand, being like, limiting myself, right, I think is a big part of it. What can I do with the bare minimum? Because now we have the ability to have anything we want at any given time. Right. Right. I want this cool new, you know, string part. Well, you can have that string part. It just costs you, you know, $19. So limiting myself kind of intentionally now. And what can I do with just 5 tracks? You know, or what can I do with only this set of sounds and make something with it? I think is important. And can be inspiring as well, because I don't know. I grew up with a 4-track and with a cassette tape.
Me too.
Yeah,
Tascam.
The Tascam. 464. I think it's still in storage.
I have it in my closet.
Nice.
In fact, I made you remember it was before I met you, right before I met you, but I made an EP in the fall of '97 I had a Tascam 8-track. Oh. It would even use skinnier strips on those cassette tapes. You know what I mean?
Wow.
But it gave you more room.
Dynamic range, but
but it gave you more room. But you don't want to bounce that shit, or the hiss was out of control. But you had 8 tracks, so and we got super creative with that. And I that was probably, if anything, the creative predecessor to what I'm doing now, because we had just come out of the studio and we did like a big studio recording, and then I had all these other songs that I was setting aside, and I did all that on the 8-track instead, and just with my buddy, my buddy Todd. And so he and I did all that together, and another friend came in and added just weird shit on top, and that ended up being the most important recording I ever did in that era. Yeah, because it was so experimental.
Yeah, there's something limiting. So the other thing, and I'll do this, I think I last did it probably this summer, so when we were out in 2010, Switchfoot was opening up. I love those, come to know those guys, go to all their shows. But what John Foreman, the singer, would do is every day he would go sit under a tree with his acoustic guitar and a notepad and write a song. Take a half hour and just write a song. And I remember I asked him, like, what do you do? And he goes, this is an exercise. I have to practice songwriting, so I write a song a day. He goes, and after this tour is done, I'll have 80 songs, and I'll throw away probably 75 of them. But at least I have practice. I've experimented in different things and tried different things. So when I get stuck, I'll do that. For the first 20 minutes when I get home, I'm going to write a riff, and if I get to a chorus, awesome. And and then walk away from it. And after a month, I've now got, 20 ideas, 25 ideas, some of which might be valid, most of which I can just throw away. But I've gone through kind of getting rid of some of the muck by just getting it out there. This doesn't work, this does work, and you start to hone in. And I think as songwriters, as we have to practice songwriting the same way we practice our instrument. It's no different, right? Football player wants to stay good at football, you got to keep on practicing. A songwriter that wants to stay good at songwriting has to keep on songwriting. So understanding that I have to run drills, just to keep up. But utilizing that as a means for inspiration is something I didn't expect. So now I'm stuck. I don't know what to write. Another good one too, and I think this really hit me coming out of COVID, the pandemic, I should say, because we're still in COVID, it seems like. Right, Ken?
Obviously.
Closer than you think.
Right? Yeah. Live shows. There is something inspiring about a live show, especially when the band does something different that wasn't on the album. The last thing I had sent you, I think the MP3 called Forward, like it was Switchfoot was open. We saw them, seen them a week ago, and they had an intro to a song that we'd never heard before. Like we heard the song, but it was a different, and it just rocked. I'm like, I want to write something that rocks that hard. And sure enough, I wrote a riff and sent it to Daigle, and then I stepped away from it, and we'll revisit it. But there is something about live shows and hearing it and seeing it that it does motivate, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, man.
We took, how many songs did we take from your month of writing a song a day? You just
like 3.
Record them,
yeah,
send them, and I don't know how long it takes. You said sometimes you hate 99% of the music out there. When you find a new song, you too, Jason, when you find a new song that you like, how long does it take you? How many times do you have to hear that song before you're like, hey, I like this?
Yeah, you and I have talked about this.
Yeah.
It's
how many instances?
As a fan.
The first time you heard it, before the song was over, you're like, I like this.
Now, as a fan, and these are great moments when you just stumble onto something that you realize is going to be something that you're going to really get a lot out of somehow as a music listener. And it's not the first listen. The first listen you might feel, oh, it was interesting, The second listen, you're like, okay, but between the third and the fifth listens, all of a sudden you realize the greatness of what you're listening to. And that is, as a music fan, that kind of like moment of nirvana, right? Where you're like, damn, like I want to listen to this. And deep in your mind that every song has a certain number of listens where you're going to get that maximum enjoyment out of.
Yep.
And you don't want to exhaust them.
Yeah.
Because at a certain point, it's going to wear off. I mean, not entirely, but you're never going to hit that high point like you do maybe between listens 3 and 10.
Yeah.
But after that, you're like, okay, it's still a great song. I still love listening. Here's a song, right? Okay. Of all the bands we've talked about so far here, this is going to be the widest range of like musical taste, I got to say, because it's the band I'm about to reference, Big Thief. Okay, Big Thief is an indie rock, folky kind of rock band, but they're kind of eclectic. And they released a double album, I think at the beginning of 22, and it's got a song on it, which is the title track called Dragon, New Warm Mountain, I Believe in You. So it's a mouthful.
Oh my gosh.
It's a mouthful.
Big Thief.
But the song is that song. The whole album is phenomenal, and I highly recommend. I'm actually going to see them live in a month, and they're a great band. But this song, I as I said, you get into something and you read everything about it you can find, right? And so I know they recorded this song probably 4 different times in 4 different studios, 4 completely different approaches, and they picked what is, I'm guessing, more of a kind of subtle and surreal version of it that they put out on the record. But I think live they play a much heavier version.
Okay.
Which I've seen on YouTube, which is cool.
Nice.
But this song is that kind of song for me, where you know how you get your Spotify Wrapped at the end of the year and it tells you like what your most listened thing.
Yeah.
So it's funny. My daughter, who's 16, she got hers, and her number one song she listened to 3,000 times because she loops it at night or whatever.
Okay, yeah.
My number one song that I listened to more than anything else was this song, Dragon New Warm Mountain, and I listened to it 23 times. Okay.
Still a lot.
Yeah, it's still a lot, right?
Not 3,000.
Right. But the point is that, like, I listened to that, and I knew around the third or fourth or fifth listen that, you know, how much I loved the song and how much I was getting out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I listened to it 23 times. And I listen to it now. I don't want to listen to it over and over, but if I hold back and listen to it once a month or every other month now, I can still get that kind of like
that high. You
high
ration
from it.
your
you know what I mean?
your song. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
What you have to do is you have to deny yourself. I don't want to use the obvious metaphor here.
Right. I got you. Well,
you're a responsible drug user if your drug is music.
The reason I ask is because, I mean, I can probably count on one hand the amount of times I heard a song one time and I was like, I like this. Some of my favorite bands, like Tool and whatnot, the first time I heard the song, I was like, this does something to me. It moves me one way or the other. Either it makes me angry or it takes my anger away, or that's what I attach to. I'm not saying everyone attaches to that sort of thing when they listen to a song, but a handful where I heard it the first time, loved it, and I still listen to that band. So when Jason sent his little clips for us to go over and see if there was anything worth keeping, I tried to listen to as many as I can, and only one caught me on the first listen, but the other two, when I went back to listen to them again, I was like, how did I even pass by that one?
There's something there.
This one's definitely, so there's something to be said for taking an idea that either Jason or you write on guitar or Neil writes or whoever, and listening to it, multiple kind of let it marinate.
Mm-hmm.
Because you might listen to it the first couple of times and say, I don't know what we would do with that, and come back 2 weeks later, listen to it, and like, okay, yeah.
I understand this now.
When I started listening to it again, I was anticipating parts, so I know my brain has latched onto it, right?
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the hook, or I'm waiting for the solo.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I think I don't know, everybody experiences music differently, but I think that's like the beauty of it. Is if you can hear it.
We're
and
musicians, so we have a better opinion
right.
than everybody else.
Yeah, we have the best opinion.
Yeah.
It's really amazing to listen to just a guitar, or maybe I think you put the drum.
I've been putting
backing.
a lot of drums. Yeah, I mean with drum loops now, I just throw up a drum loop and then I'll even put bass now and like stepping on Brandon's toes. But I need to hear this.
Well, the more I can hear, like the easier it is to say, oh yeah, we could definitely do something. So I think that process to me is really part of the fun. And then the real my favorite part is when people contribute, and it's like, look at this little one thing we had, and it's just become this. Yeah.
You know what else is interesting is I'll write something on guitar, and then instead of recording it as guitar, I'll record it as something else. Right. Just I have here's my two chords. Here's the part. All right, strings and a piano.
Mm-hmm.
Just to get the idea down, right? I don't even feel like getting the guitar up, but I know the notes. I can crank it out in 2 minutes. And all of a sudden I listen back there and it sounds like crap, right? Like what happened between here? And I go back, all right, hang on, do I have this right? Yeah. And then I go back here and it's not. So there's something about, too, the tools that you're using to present the part, right? What sounds good on a guitar doesn't always sound good on a piano. And I was always of the idea of the song is the song.
Right.
It doesn't matter what you play it on, it's going to sound great.
Yeah.
So then I start questioning the validity of what I just wrote. If it sounds good here but not here, is it even worthy anymore of me exploring?
Yeah.
So then you kind of get in your head about the whole thing.
I've gone through that with lyrics where I'll have the melody and I'll start writing the lyrics, and then I'll read the lyric and it'll be something like that has a reference to drugs or whatever, and I'm like, I can't write that. I've never done drugs. I can't. I'm not telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've got caught up on that so many times, or I never actually saw that. I can't write that. So it goes back to maybe that's why I like Atlanta so much too, is that you understand what he's telling, even though he's got ebbs and flows and he's way out here in right field and then he comes back. Like I'm not able to do that all the time because I feel like what I'm writing down I have no experience in that. Like, I don't know what that's like. Why am I, very strange. I guess,
I
let go, let go.
I've thought about that a lot, like in terms of the honesty of a lyric or whatever.
Right.
But now I feel like I approach it more as an impressionist type of a thing. Like I'll write a lyric and I try to keep it really concise, and I'll repeat a whole bar if I feel like I've already, the idea is complete.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I also, it's not literal. Parts of that's what's interesting about lyric writing, because I got to get. You talk about like when you're figuring out how this shit works, right? For me, it starts mostly with music, but when I have to get into lyric mode, and heavily into lyric mode, and then I can write lyrics for one song and then another song and then another song, and then I will constantly be revising them until I feel satisfied. But I have to be very much in that mode. I can't just shift. I can't write. It's very rare that I can write a good lyric just at the same time I write the music, or right after. Yep. I need to know what the fuck. I need to be thinking about, like, I need to have something to say, and and even if I don't know what it is or where it's going, I feel like I don't know that I feel the same, that I need to feel like I need to have experienced it, because I think the more I write things that are more impressionistic, like I'll write a lot about metaphorically, like, death and dying and shit like this.
But you've never died.
I've never died.
Right.
And, hopefully it's a long way off, but the point is that, like, I write a lot about, blasting off from the earth.
Yeah.
I write a lot about
you did
space things.
You took that ride with Bezos with the rocket.
Oh,
right?
yeah, of
So,
course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but ultimately, right, you're going to write about the human experience in some way.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have experienced whatever you're writing about in order to write about it. You're just writing your knowledge about it.
And I know that.
Yeah.
But I catch myself, I'm like, I can't say that. I have this ridiculous idea that people are going to hear it and they'll be like, Brandon's never done that. He's never taken a drug, and he's writing about how it feels beyond. You know what I mean? Like, I have this silly hang up that I have to write something true to my life, or what I perceive as to be part of my life. It's just a silly thing of but letting go.
But your life and where you live your life is in here.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it's out here.
Yeah.
But a huge part of it's in there.
Sure, yeah.
And so trying to communicate what's going on inside your head, to me, is as legitimate as, what happens outside your head. And so people don't know what you're experiencing in your head.
Exactly. And I try to convince myself, I'm like, look, I can write a lyric about the wind blowing and how it rustles the branches and the flowers, but maybe try to tell that point of view from a tree. How does the tree see you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and then I'm like, no, I'm not a tree. I can't do that. I can't guess. I can't,
I'm still waiting for the tree to write that song down.
Yeah.
I want to know the tree's experience, and I need you to tell me.
It's exactly like I don't know. That's a hang up that I have, that I feel like I have to write somewhat truthfully. It's silly, but I'm human.
So I was going to bring up Devin Townsend a few times, because I've still been stuck on him for like years and years.
Sure, yeah.
And I don't. He's got a line in one of his songs. I forget the name of it, but he basically says, "Music, it's just entertainment, folks." It's like, I need to remember that every now and then. Like,
yeah.
I don't have to take music so seriously as I always do.
Yeah.
Right? There's many times where, even for me, it's just entertainment. There's some times where I'm in a different mode and like I wanna feel something from it or something. But some of my favorite songs, the ones that I grab onto the most, going back to what you were saying, so like Paramore, This Is Why, when that came, I don't listen to Paramore generally, but when that song, there was something about that song that came out, and I didn't read into it.
You just enjoyed it.
It's fun. It's entertainment.
Yeah.
Right? The songs I really, the slow burners, the new Devin Townsend album, I didn't care for the album when I first heard it. Like, it was okay. I've listened to it about 4 times now, and it's great.
Yeah.
But that's more than entertainment, right? Because he's talking about his experience through the pandemic and trying to grow as an artist while being isolated. And so I relate to that on a different level than Paramore.
Right.
So just keeping in mind every now and then, and like, am I taking myself too seriously with
I
this?
think that's what it is.
Yeah.
Take myself too seriously.
Yeah.
It's I'm not that important. Just write what
This is
flows.
meant to be fun.
Right.
It's meant to be fun.
You know why? I'm a Beatles fanatic, and talk about a band that understood that shit, man.
Yeah.
They would do serious songs, fun songs, silly songs, pop songs, rock songs. They were all over the board. Whatever they felt like, whatever struck their fancy at the time, they would do it. And it reflected the human experience, which is the great thing, because we're not all serious all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
And so allowing yourself the freedom to do something that's sillier or catchier next to the more contemplative or serious stuff.
Yep.
And I have to remind myself of the same thing, because I want to try to incorporate some lighter shit into like each successive project, while at the same time trying to, make larger points.
I did want to say during the lyric thing that one thing I've heard, if it was something Ken wanted me to listen to, he would send it. If he didn't want me to hear it, he wouldn't send it. And there may not be any of that, but from probably the first song I've ever heard was that, Ken, your lyrics are, you tell a great story. You in this amount of space where my lyrics might be 4 words per line size-wise, he tells a continuing story. And that has depth. That's like reading a book, right?
Yep.
And he's always been good at that. I think that's what I would consider a person to be a singer-songwriter is when they can truly tell a story. Sit down with a guitar, sing it, play it, and you get the full picture.
Yeah.
It doesn't need a full band. He's always been good,
Thanks, man.
Been good at that,
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Well, that's what makes a great songwriter, right? Because it's all storytelling, right?
Yeah.
But even like my dad will say that I waste too much time watching Netflix and Hulu and all that, and like, but Dad, I enjoy storytelling and the art of storytelling, and even if I don't enjoy the story, like I find myself, what was I watching last night? Jack Ryan, and it's like, ooh, look at that transition. That transition from one scene to that was great, and the color contrast now is giving this vibe. Like I'm almost overanalyzing it now as opposed to just enjoying it.
Right.
But I enjoy storytelling, right? We're the only animal that we know that can tell stories and make stuff up and have imagination. So why not enjoy that part of our experience of just storytelling? But also keeping in mind, like I said, we also need fun. Mm-hmm. One of my funnest projects was Angry Neighbors, which was we had five backline texts on Goo Goo Dolls, which is unheard of. You normally have 2, right? Guy that takes care of like bass and drums, and a guy that takes care of guitars. We had 5. Mm-hmm. So we had enough guys for a band. And we wrote just the most raunchy, roady crap that we could write, whether it's about like hooking up with girls in a parking lot, or whether it's about like having to eat pizza every night. Mm-hmm. It was so much fun though, right? And there was no serious content to it, right? Like, this isn't a true human experience. I mean, it was our experience, right? Eating shitty pizza, but it was fun. Yeah. There was no depth to it.
Yeah.
So having that outlet every now and then, this is rock and write about pizza.
Yeah.
And have fun with it.
Yeah.
I don't think as artists sometimes we want to be deep and meaningful and have some depth to what we're trying to express. And I don't need that all the time, though.
See, that's what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, where you were talking about whose album? Lisa Marie Presley's album, where it was like, if you look at it, it's like a straight line of compressed sound all the way through. And we were talking about using silence, but it's the same thing. It's using different emotion, an emotional palette that winds you through things so that the highs feel higher and the lows feel lower.
Yeah.
And a moment of comic relief feels that much better, or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And ultimately, people don't want to go out and dance to like heavy subjects. You know.
Yeah, right.
Definitely not as dance worthy as
exactly.
Did you ever see that
Bad
movie?
Pizza.
Did you ever see that movie? This Is 40,
Yes.
where Paul Rudd puts on like Rooster by. And he's like, I can dance to this.
Yeah.
Allison Chains.
Allison Chains.
Yeah.
And his wife and his kids are like playing some, pop dance music. And they're like, this is fun. This is, and they start dancing around. And then he's like, he puts on Allison Chains, like, I can dance to this.
Yeah, right.
It's like doing this kind of thing.
Oh, something else you'd previously said, going back to listening to something and like you only have so many listens before you're kind of burnt out on it, or you're just kind of over it. What's been really fun, so we're all about the same age, right? I'm in my 40s, similar 40s.
50s, man.
Okay.
I've broken through the barrier.
Oh, boy. Congratulations.
And he's still with us.
Yeah.
It's good.
You guys have a little more gray than me, but I'm getting there. But no, now going back, like, I don't know. There was one that I put on Def Leppard High and Dry and just listened to it straight through, and then went right to Hysteria, and then went back to Pyromania, and stuff I haven't really sat down and listened to other than just background on the radio in 20, 30 years at this point. But all of a sudden I'm hooked again.
Dude.
And like listening to Animal, like I'm sitting in my house just like rocking out like I was when I was 16.
Listen, man, and this is giving away my age, but I would listen to Pyromania when it
came
on
out.
cassette
Yep.
after it came out while I was folding papers to do my paper route. All right? 14 years old or whatever. Yep. I mean, and I can go back and listen to that album now and be like, damn, this is, like, I love it. I love it. But it's also because of that moment in time for me, right?
Yeah.
It is nostalgia, but it's also when you have the right elements to a great song or a great painting or a great photograph.
Yep.
Right? It's able to withstand time because...
Well, and coming back around to it reignites that, I don't know, that same feeling. And maybe it is relating to something, but sometimes it's just, man, I forgot how good of a fucking song this was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like...
Oh, dude, or you go and like now, right? I was like going, I was just trying to figure out like, how do I play Wrapped Around Your Finger on guitar?
Oh, okay.
And I went and I found a YouTube lesson or whatever, and I was like, oh, it's like 2 chords back and forth. That's all. It's A minor to E minor. I mean, or E minor 7. The 7 is important in that song to give it that color or whatever. But it's just like that.
Well, all the non-harmonic notes in all of their songs are very important.
Right.
Synchronicity 2 is very similar, right? Like the 2nd and the 6th are big.
Yes. And Andy Summers has the delay pedal going on that. All that stuff. But I'm just like trying to just like do it with my fingers or whatever. But I'm doing it. And I'm going back and forth. I'm listening to how the melody works with those chords, where he's starting the melody on those chords and stuff like that. And I just remember thinking to myself, those guys were in such a fucking great creative space for that. Even they hated each other, but they were in
maybe that's what drove it.
But they were in a great creative space at that moment because, man, those songs.
I'm going to go home now and listen to the Synchronicity album.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Seriously.
But it's I know what's going to happen. It's amazing. Like, and I'm going to be right
Sounds
back
amazing today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So... You have kids? Do you have kids, Ken?
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned you have kids because you listen to a song 3,000 times in a year.
Yeah.
So I don't know, as musicians growing up and obviously going to music school, listening to the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Doors, Pink Floyd, kind of all the go-tos. And then sometimes we'll go back further, right? I listen to definitely some Motown and stuff from the 50s and 40s. Are we... seeing that with kids these days going back that far, or is that too far removed from their audio experience to actually enjoy something from the 40s and 50s?
I think if you told them how old it was, it would turn them off. If you just played it, it would probably be a different story. Elias had some friends over for a little party a couple of days ago, and they were singing at the top of their lungs the Hey Now You're an All-Star.
Oh boy,
Smash Mouth.
Smash Mouth, right?
Smash Mouth, yeah.
Top of their lungs. So that's not extremely old,
Yeah.
but
Well, that's
It
that-
is an
that's
older
classic for them,
right.
Yeah.
So it's an older song. I think if you were to present them with something that was an older song from the Police, and they heard it, they would probably appreciate it more than if you said, "Hey, I want you to listen to this 35-year-old song," right? So, I think soundtracks have a lot to do with. If you're watching a movie and you're engaged, doesn't matter how old the song is.
Yep.
If it fits the scene or the emotion, you're probably going to like it, no matter if you're a teenager or 80 years old,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I'm just thinking production-wise, all of a sudden now we can get down to 20 hertz in a recording where you're not going to hear that on a Led Zeppelin album, right? Like, you listen to something now, especially a R&B song, go listen to The Weeknd and then go put on Led Zeppelin. You'd be like, what happened to the bass?
Yeah.
Where did it go? So technology has lended itself to, in some great ways, much more dynamic freedom than we had before. But now that we have that, everything is so thick and everything is almost any file is super compressed, right? You listen to anything on the radio when it's mastered, it needs to be the same level all the way through without any dips or we're in 60s, 70s, even sometimes in the 80s weren't like that. So are kids these days, are their ear even going to be able to accept something that has that much range?
Well, my kids are pretty good, actually. And my daughter really has really retro taste.
Okay.
She loves the Smiths. She loves the Cure.
Oh, nice.
She's listening to this 80s stuff. She's a hardcore Swiftie as far as like
Modern.
current stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like she likes that old stuff. If you were to put on stuff way back from like the 40s, like if you were to put on like Cole Porter Night and Day or something,
Yeah.
I think your point is exactly right. If she saw it in the context of a movie or a soundtrack and it brought and it just really like relayed some kind of emotional thing, she would totally get into it. That might be her like exposure to it. I don't know that she would, when she's going down and trying to discover new music, because I suspect that in the future she'll be somebody who will continue to, sort of like me, which is why I'm very proud of her. She'll like look for new music and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
I don't know if she'll go all the way down to like the 40s or 50s. I think she may go back as far as like the Beatles or something.
Okay.
But I think if it was presented to her in a certain context, that she would find it pretty interesting. I mean, like discovering Billie Holiday or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because once she does, it'll open up a whole world to her of these great that whole era.
Yeah.
And the greatness that was that.
At some point, if they only listen to The Weeknd, who's phenomenal, he's
Yeah.
very talented. I love his music. They don't understand where that started.
Where it came
right?
from.
You got to go back far enough to understand what happened to allow The Weeknd
Yep.
to be who he is and sound, who allows Kanye to be a dumbass,
Yep.
but a creative one, right?
Yeah.
Like, it had to start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's good if they can go back and find those bands and be like, that's the first time an electric guitar was ever recorded, right?
Yep.
So it's convincing them to do that or finding a way to allow them to find that in a natural way without forcing it on them or trying to trick them. Say, hey, listen to this new song, and it's from 1940s. So
Well, I used to do this thing with the kids where before they would go to sleep at night, we would all sit in a room with the lights out, and I would play 3 songs in a row for them, and I would try to make them as eclectic as I could and from totally different eras. And I would say, I'd play one, I'd say, what do you think of that? And I'd just get their instant reaction. Like sometimes they were just like, yeah, it's good, whatever. Sometimes they'd be like, yeah, that was really cool, like the mood or whatever. So, I would try to like give them some exposure to some of that stuff. And they actually, even to this day, they're like, remember when we used to do that? And I'm like, yeah, we should do it again.
See, it already took. Angela has a very wide musical palette. She listens to anything and everything at any part of the day, whereas I'm more likely to put on something that I like, right? Like something that I really like. And so the kids are exposed to reggae, they're exposed to rap, they're exposed to alt J, they're exposed to Tool.
Yeah.
They get to listen to all these things, and hopefully as they get older and they hear them in different places, whether it's TV or the radio or whatnot, they might gravitate towards that. But I would hope that they would not just settle for whatever's on the radio, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. People. I mean, it's like whether it's music or anything else, people are perfectly content to be spoon-fed.
Yeah.
A bunch of shit. And so, but if you're willing to dig, you can find good stuff. But as I said, you have to sift through more shit than ever.
You have to sift through a lot. Do you guys still listen to the radio at all?
I listen to Sirius XM, but not really like. Actually, there is in Philly a local station that is like a college station like that. I'll listen. I wake up on I still wake up to my clock radio. So
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
I have to have a real radio station that wakes me up.
Yeah.
So
the one, I don't know, maybe this is just part of me getting older, or maybe I feel old because of it, but so Jody, school teacher, wife is a school teacher, and so she kind of stays up on what's new and happening, and all of a sudden, like when The Weeknd came up, or when Billie Eilish came out, or like Dua Lipa, I didn't know who these people were until like 2 years into their career.
Yeah.
Because I'm not plugged in the way I used to be, and I don't know, like as a musician, sometimes I feel like I should be, right? I should know what's modern, and other times I'm just like, I don't give a shit.
Well, it's like the old adage that your dad is like, you're listening to Muse. Your dad's like, what is this crap? If it's not Led Zeppelin, it's crap. You feel yourself like, my kids are listening to whatever.
Yeah. Dude, we put on Switchfoot one time when Jody's parents were over, and her dad had a bit of a fit because it wasn't the Beatles.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The guitar was a little bit too distorted, and he's like, this is too angry. Like, dude, this is a Christian band. There's nothing angry about this at all. They're singing about love and life, and yet this is offending you somehow. But I think it's the same thing. Like, he's kind of stuck in that era.
Sure.
And I don't want to be that way, but I find myself more and more that way, where I don't really care about, and I should, right? Because then I hear the songs, I'm like, oh, this artist is great. Why didn't I? But there's also so much I can't keep up anymore. Where maybe sometimes being spoon-fed, like in the 70s and 80s, where all we had was the radio, was a little bit easier.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between being spoon-fed today, which is done by corporate algorithm.
That's fair.
Versus in the 70s when you had individual DJs that would actually
play what they wanted to play.
And you could also get to know their taste, so you know that what they recommend. So they were tastemakers.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
So, but that era is so far in the rearview mirror.
You have to become your own DJ basically with your Spotify.
Or you have to find people whose opinions you trust, whether you rely on, whoever, whatever, zine is reviewing it or whatever. Wherever you go.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I know these guys and I know their taste, and so it's.
Did that happen because I kind of see that that's MTV era, right?
Is there a pause button? I'm going to go to the bathroom.
Go to the bathroom. We'll keep on talking. We're going to finish this up here shortly. We've been talking for 2 hours.
This is fun.
Well, we can wrap up.
Let's wrap up with a moment in time. Who are you guys listening to these days that everybody listening to this podcast should go listen to right now?
That's a good question.
So I'll start. I do think that the new Devin Townsend album, now that I've listened to it a few times, is worth it. And I think it's more accessible sonically than some of his other stuff, which is very prog metal rockish. This one is not that at all.
I'll support you on that, because ever since you introduced me to Devin, I would have never found that guy. And he's another example of so many talented artists out there who, how do you find them all? But amazing.
He's one of those guys that I've heard it a few times, and I think the more I listen to him, the more I agree. he's one of the greatest musicians of our time that will never be recognized for what he is in our time. The fact that he can do a rock album followed by an ambient album followed by a country album followed by a pop album is pretty remarkable these days, and also has the voice of like 8 different people inside of him and can do it all himself at home with nobody else is pretty fantastic. But he also very much writes to the human experience. Like that's kind of his thing. He's not generally writing about anything else other than what he's going through and how to mentally get through stuff. So the new one, Light Work, is very much like where he was mentally trying to get through the pandemic, being isolated, and just trying to watch and not be so much of a part of the chaos, but yet still being in the chaos of it. I think it's a great album, and it's going to be highly overlooked by most people because it's not his prog metal stuff.
Yeah.
The Puzzle I had a hard time with the previous one because it was just ambient, but I thought it was really good.
Yeah.
So I'm going to always recommend checking out his stuff.
I like that ambient stuff a lot. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. The Puzzle followed by, so he always does these double albums too. So he's like, I've released 25 albums in 25 years. He's like, no, dude, you've released 50. Because every time you do an album, you do a compendium, like a second album with it. So Puzzle was dark, Snuggles was kind of light. The problem with Devin, though, I put it on to sleep one night on Alexa, and because the Spotify algorithm has him as prog metal, when the album was done, it went to Meshuggah. So at 2 a.m, all of a sudden there's like this blaring metal music playing in my room that I was not expecting. And I didn't know what was going on. And so I panicked, just unplugged Alexa and threw her across the room. Like, I don't know where this came from. But waking up in the morning, I'm like, oh, of course. I didn't, after an ambient album by a prog metal guy, the next one's going to be prog metal. So anyway, so you guys got anybody else that I should go listen to?
I mean, I guess I would say I'll put a plug in for a few different things. Big Thief.
Yep.
Which their most recent album, which is that double album. TV Wise Atlanta, as I said.
Okay.
We could do a whole like podcast on that show alone, probably.
Yeah.
Once you guys watch it, and then so my buddy Brian, who owns the studio, Minor Street, also has a nonprofit called Weather Vane Music.
Okay.
And he has a whole video series that Weather Vane sponsors called Shaking Through. It's also on YouTube. You can see these. They do essentially like 25-minute documentaries of recording various bands at their studio, and it's phenomenal to watch. Actually, not just creative process, but just how a working band actually does it in the studio. And he had been doing those for 10 years. I think he stopped doing it when COVID hit. Although he may have other things in store here soon, but I would recommend checking that out as well.
Okay, cool.
I'm still big into Manchester Orchestra. They just put out a couple of new albums, so I'll be listening to them for a while. Jose Gonzalez, I really like a lot. I don't know, I listen to a lot of stuff, but I kind of stick with my favorites. When I hear new stuff, I get excited, but it's been pretty quiet for me, just listening to what I know.
I'm looking forward to this next year because I think we're going to see more and more albums coming out that came out of the pandemic, right? Like it already has started, right?
Yeah.
But, it'll be an interesting year for music. Well, it's going to be an interesting year in general in the world itself.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. Any final thoughts before we get out of here, guys? Ken, thank you for coming down, man.
Yeah, it's fun.
So I don't know if anybody watching this, it's Christmas Eve, and we're hanging out at our office shooting the shit. So thanks for coming down and taking some time away from family. Or congratulations, you got away from the family.
I come down, so as Brandon knows, I come down here every Christmas, although it's been 3 years because of COVID since I've been down here for Christmas. And we have various things scheduled family-wise, but I never am told what the schedule's going to be.
Got ya.
So when Brandon called me yesterday, he said, when can we do this? And I was like, My wife told me I have until 2 p.m. today, so this was actually a great use of time.
Yeah.
So
Perfect,
it was
man.
really, really fun.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Let's. You coming back next year?
Probably,
All right. Well,
barring another pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well, we can do a year follow-up year from now.
Yeah.
So, awesome, guys. Well, thanks. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, super fun.
enjoyed it.
I
Thanks.
enjoyed it. All right, man. Well, until next time. I don't have a sign off, so I don't know. Go enjoy Christmas, guys.
All right.
All right.
See you.